Scott Myers is the executive director of SAD, which began 44 years ago as Students Against Driving Drunk. This national nonprofit expanded its scope and impact in 1997, becoming Students Against Destructive Decisions. Leading SAD, Scott focuses on crisis prevention, peer-to-peer advocacy, and empowering the next generation of leaders. Welcome to the Science of Good, where we sit down with cause leaders who are disrupting the status quo, tackling our toughest societal problems, and seeking better ways to spark change. Welcome, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited about this conversation. So to get us started, tell us a little bit about the history and the work of SAD.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invite. I really appreciate this. Coming on and talk about SAD is definitely a privilege. We've been around since '81, I believe. We actually started out as Students Against Driving Drunk, and over the years have really listened to our students. Our sweet spot really is high school, although we do some work in kind of middle school. We do some work in college, but the high school age group really has been our sweet spot. And they have been telling us for over 40 years that it's more than just driving drunk. It's more than just the decisions that might put themselves or their peers in danger that were important to them. So over the years, not only have we changed our name to be Students Against Destructive Decisions, but have really encompassed a lot of decision-making situations and issues that are important to our youth, such as health and mental health, substance use prevention, leadership development, all of those things. Fast forward to now, we are the nation's premier youth health and safety organization. We have thousands of chapters across the United States. We impact 250,000 students and youth every single year, from prevention awareness activities, events, education, leadership opportunities, really to give them a voice and how they can impact change for themselves and their peers.
So powerful because, Kevin, I remember this organization when I was growing up as a teen in high school.
That has me thinking back to my teenage years, and I'd look at Gen Z and see how much more wise and accepting they are than in my time. But I'm also struck by, the issues that they're facing are so much more dire and ever present. So I'm just curious, Scott, with your members, I would imagine many are coming to you because they've had first or secondhand experience with trauma or tragedy. Is that the primary entry point?
I would say yes, but because we are an organization that's really focused on prevention, while we do have a good number of students and youth that, unfortunately have seen, witnessed, or experienced tragedy in those areas, you also have a good group or a good number that honestly just care. They really see the need for all of us to take ownership in the decisions that we make, as well as the resources that we all need to make healthy decisions. So yes, they may, have seen or witnessed, situations. They may have, experienced mental health crisis or, obstacles when it comes to those kind of situations. But you also have a good group that are literally just they care. They want to help. They see the need, and they just want to commit what they can to impact healthy decision-making for themselves, as well as their family, their peers, and their community. So it really is a little bit of both.
I'm a mom of teens, and Scott, we talked about this prior to this discussion. One of the things that I'm really interested in and that really amazes me that the people that you're trying to help, Scott, are also your messengers, teenagers. So can you talk to us about how you manage that?
Yeah, we were founded over 40 years ago, and we still to this day are a student-led, youth-focused organization. Some good examples are the fact that we have youth that sit on our national board of directors. We have several layers of advisory councils that are specifically used to where they really are helping guide and inform and kind of, push us in the directions which we do that. Now, obviously, they can't do that alone. So we do have staff. We do have, we build an infrastructure of adult allies. Our chapters have chapter advisors, which typically are, teachers, instructors, police officers, or resource officers, adult allies that really support and want to make that happen. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it is our students that come to us and say, this is what we want to do. This is how we want to do it. This is what's going to resonate with our peers or our community. And they run with it. It really takes a village, right? Like we have to work with our volunteers, our advisors. We have to work with students' parents. We work with the students themselves. We have a small but mighty staff team, but it really is coming together, managing this as a team approach and understanding that the students are the ones that are our messengers. They're the ones wanting this information. And we work with them to see how it's best delivered and best presented to have the most impact.
Powerful. Scotty, you mentioned that the organization is more than 40 years old. I think about how forward thinking it was to have students be the lead messenger, particularly now when we see peer-to-peer based communications. That's what social media is all about. So your members are communicating with one another and with their peers. The power of that is certainly undeniable. I'm curious, though, when I think about some of the behavioral science biases that come into play, such as optimism bias, that bad things aren't going to happen to me, even if I make some poor decisions, or the halo effect, seeing young people on television and film that make poor decisions and often don't have dire consequences as a result. Do you see the peer-to-peer communication as a key reason that you're overcoming some of those biases?
So is yes. While there's definitely nuances that go along with that, I wish we could find a way to combat or solve this issue and the halo effect. Nothing will ever happen to me. I'm untouchable. Unfortunately, that's probably always going to be with us. But for SAD, what we have seen over 40 years, and honestly, what some of the research even shows is that it's that peer-to-peer work that really has a lasting impact. Rashada, you said you have teenage kids. I have teenage kids. I have young adult kids. As parents, we try to instill morals and values and guide them. That's helpful, but it'll only take you so far. I work with the board of directors, and I always tell them it's one thing for me to tell you what to do, but if you tell each other or work with each other peer to peer, we're going to have much more progress and impact. It's the same thing with youth. If we can train and educate and make aware the youth to interact and engage and empower their friends and neighbors, that's going to have a much more lasting impact. So, Kevin, to your point, 100%, that's really what SAD was founded on. It's carried us through 40 years, and the progress and the success that we've seen over 40 years really can be traced back to this peer-to-peer approach that SAD has had.
I'm interested in knowing about some of the common misperceptions. Are there any concerning problems that you're working to solve? And how do you go about addressing those?
Yeah, I actually had this conversation the other day because, STAD has been kind of in this advocacy world since the beginning, right? Having students go testify at their state or even the national capital of the impact of, the need to change laws or, things like graduated driver's license laws. So there are some states to where, you can get a certain driver's license at 15, but then you have so many restrictions. And once you turn 16, you can get some skills. You can go up to another driver's license. And SAD has been a part of that on a state-by-state basis since the very beginning. There are definitely advocacy issues that we have stayed with and continue to go through. Well, Rashonda, to your question, I would say what is important for SAD moving forward is continuing to elevate youth voices. Because while it makes sense that this peer-to-peer work is important, research will show that sometimes allowing youth in the same circle that I'm in and listening to them and letting them have an equal voice is still a little hard to get over for some people, right? Sometimes as adults, we get into that rut, especially if we have kids. We're like, I'm a parent. I know what to do. And I have the answer kind of thing. And it could be very intimidating to have some serious conversations on some very serious issues that honestly have life impacting consequences to sit across from a 15-year-old and let them have an equal voice. And so for SAD, I think the biggest advocacy piece and the most important kind of topic moving forward for us is continuing to allow the youth to have their voice of what is important to them, how it needs to be presented to them, why we need to make it a national conversation, and then allow them to be a part of the solutions because they know best for themselves and their peers, right? Like that age.
One of the things I wanted to ask you concerning that, because you talked about amplifying young people's voices and bringing them to the table. When it comes to that, there's a lot of conversations in my house and friend circles and other parent circles around mental health with our teens and young adults. And so how does SAD approach that, especially when it comes to there's still stigma around mental health?
Yeah, and I think that, for SAD, it's important to remember, like, we're not an intervention. We are a prevention. So for us, really is giving access to the resources that are, needed, that are important in those. So while we may not be the experts in mental health, what SAD really is able to do is partner and look for those organizations that are really cutting edge, that have the resources and education that students are really looking for. Problem is, it can be so overwhelming that things are like, where do I even begin? I am having problems with managing school and work and sports and after school clubs. And I got to take care of my younger sibling and like chores at home. I mean, those are just like 6 or 7 things I just named out my head, not including
Sure.
anything else. And students, sometimes it's like, where do I start? SAD has the opportunity to partner with organizations where they tend to be the experts, and we can hyper focus and help guide students in the right direction where it's not as overwhelming as to where to start.
Scott, I think you use the word overwhelm, and that is something that is huge when I look at how overprogrammed so many young people are right now. There's so many activities before, during, and after school that even handling something as simple as a babysitting job is not even a possibility anymore. I'm curious, your organization has such a huge membership with a barrage of issues and activities. How do your members have the bandwidth to get involved, and how do you engage them and keep them involved when their time is under so much scrutiny and demand?
All right, Kevin, that is not only a question, but it's the question we actually ask ourselves every single day because it is a massive hurdle to try to almost inject one more thing, right? Now, the good thing is that for us, while we want to have the broadest reach possible, the great thing is that you don't necessarily, like, not everybody has to have the same kind of job or position. So typically, what SAD does is we first go through an advisor, someone within the school or something like that, that can really help guide us to those that may have an interest, whether it's volunteering, whether it's a job, whatever the case is. Someone has to have a passion or an interest in it. For SAD, it really is trying to find that 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 students that have a passion, that are asking and maybe sometimes begging for help or guidance to really see where they can, add some value. So while we want to hit thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands of students, we don't have to start there. We start with the 1, 2, 3, or 4, because they have the bandwidth or if we can support them with the limited bandwidth they already have, then through their work, we can spread out and hopefully get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. But Kevin, to your point, it is absolutely hard because they are pulled in 15 different directions, both personally and educationally, and you name it. We try to make it as easy as possible. So one good example is we cover a gambit of topics: traffic and mobility safety, health and mental health, substance use prevention, leadership development. We kind of run the gambit. The good thing is that our students can choose those topics or issues or those events or those awareness activities, whatever it is that fits within them. So we do have chapters that do 6 trainings throughout the year. Yes, some chapters that just do 1. 1 is better than 0. And the more that we can find those that have a passion, that have an interest, that are begging for some type of guidance, we can have, some time to dedicate to this, the more we can get into the schools, and those 4, sad students that formed a chapter all of a sudden are running a red ribbon week for drug awareness and prevention within their school that has hundreds from students. So the fact that we can find 4 that can dedicate a little bit of time, that have an interest, ultimately the end result is that depending on the activity, depending on the events, we can actually touch at some level hundreds of students and sometimes thousands, depending on the school or the community.
There's a powerful lesson there for other nonprofits. As a communications professional, I was trained, be single-minded, have one message and stick to it. You're touching on 3, 4 different issues. When viewed from a traditional communications lens, that's too complicated. It's too much. What I'm hearing from you is peer-to-peer messaging that allows students to self-select what's a priority to them is an advantage, not a detractor. That's really very interesting and something I think other causes can take away from this.
Your point, like we can't be a resource to fighting the overwhelmness because we ourselves are trying to be overwhelming, right?
Right.
So for us, it's like, let's let our students and our youth self-select the issues or the topics or the avenues to intervention or prevention work that suits them and their peers, and let them run with it.
We're involved with numerous national organizations who have local and state chapters. I know you touched a little bit on this by giving advice, but are there any other tips that you can share with nonprofit CEOs on how to manage all of that on top of all the other things that they have to manage?
I tell you right now, if there is one thing that I think is incredibly important for leaders within the organization, and it can be CEOs, executive directors, program people, whatever it is, honestly, is communication. Communication to me is key to everything. Like how to approach people in the right way. For an organization like us that we interact with adults, we interact with teens, we interact with preteens, communication is so important, and doing so where it meets them. So for us, sometimes I go from emails to phone calls to texts to DMs and social media and posting on Instagram. I run the gambit of communication because depending on who I'm talking to, I really do have to meet them where they're at. And so for me, managing an organization like this, especially from a national organization, and we're a virtual organization, so we are staffed in multiple states across the country. I work out of my home just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. We have chapters in the northeast corner of Maine, as well as the southwest corner of California. I have to interact with the police officer who is a SAD advisor in Arizona. And then I also have to interact with a student leader that sits on our board in Pennsylvania, right? So to me, communicating, sometimes maybe over communicating, depending on the situation, but definitely meeting them where they're at. I run the gambit on my phone, on my computer, and on social media all the time.
Sounds like, Scott, you're very flexible. I was waiting for you to say TikTok, but it sounds like you're very flexible.
I'm still waiting for my 12-year-old to teach me TikTok.
Well, that flexibility is an interesting segue. I want to tackle the elephant in every nonprofit room, and that is funders. You have an organization that has the good fortune of having appeal to lots of different corporate partners, insurance companies, automakers, and those are in the business of safety. How do you go about prioritizing and identifying where to spend your time cultivating corporate partnerships?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Kevin, because someone that has made a career in nonprofit, like the whole funding issue really is kind of the not just the elephant in the room, but the Everest that we all have to climb, right? For SAD, our history started in the traffic and mobility space. And so therefore we have some very, very good partnerships with state and federal government through highway safety offices focused on prevention efforts to youth and traffic. So we have a really good kind of stream of funding from the government perspective. But Kevin, to your point, from the corporate perspective, we do have some partnerships, but I'll tell you right now, like despite really good partners that we do have, there is more that can be done. And for SAD, it really is trying to instill the importance of prevention and not intervention. And what I mean by that is a lot of times companies, and I would say companies, but I would say any donor, right? Any donor really wants to see like what the outcome. SAD has been in the prevention space, which honestly is really hard sometimes to show the change of behaviors because we're trying to prevent the behavior from starting at the beginning. Right? We're trying to prevent that from even happening. So for us, it can be hard to justify the work that we do because the outcomes are not known. And so we do have great partners in the corporate world. We can definitely do better. I think for us, the pathway that we have seen to do that is to continue to elevate youth voices, get their stories, let them have a voice so they can talk to companies, they can talk to donors and say, yes, your support will allow us to implement these events and activities and resources for us to make better decisions, to be healthier in this world and have a positive impact on our community.
Wow.
Powerful. Scott, our previous guest has a question for you, and then you'll get an opportunity to ask a question of our next guest. So the question for you is, how do you take care of yourself and encourage your staff to do the same?
Boy, I tell you what, that is a great question that, it can be really hard to answer. And I would say this, I have been kind of in this virtual space before the pandemic. I've been kind of working remotely before it was popular. And here's what I've learned, that people need to find the best work-life balance, especially in a virtual world. And so for me, I think allowing people to have the flexibility to do the things that they need to do throughout the day and having confidence that people can self-manage if they are taught and given their opportunity to do so, and sometimes can excel. So for me, I was on an all-staff meeting a couple months ago, and I was very clear with them. I'm like, you know what? I get it. Sometimes you got to put the laundry in from the washer into the dryer when you're working from home. I totally get it. I also totally get it if you have to work until 6 o'clock because you got to take some time during the day to get up and do that. And then, yeah, I got to make up that time, or, hey, I got this meeting or whatever. So, to me, especially in this virtual world, allowing the flexibility for people to do what they need to do to live their life, that allows the best employee output possible. For some people, that's not turning on the computer until 10 because they're working until 7, or giving people the opportunity that, I don't necessarily need to take a PTO to go to the dentist office because I'm going to make that up on the front end or on the back end, and just allowing people to have the flexibility to do that. And for me, that has been doing this for a long time, not only do I appreciate that, I actually feel like I perform better because I'd have the trust from my bosses or my supervisors or my team and then I translate that to them, and they can hopefully feel that from me if I can trust in them to do the same.
Okay, Scott. So what's your question for our next guest?
My question is, how do you fit professional development in your organization that maximizes the organization's opportunity as well as the employees to grow in their role and in their career?
That's a really good question, Scott.
Absolutely. Well, Scott, I want to thank you again for your time today and joining me and Rashonda and having this conversation. Thank you so much for the work you're doing now, for the work you've done in the past, and for believing in good.
I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you for this opportunity. Kevin, thank you. Rashonda, thank you. The work that you do to elevate these missions and these opportunities is an amazing thing. So please continue to do so, and thank you so much for what you do.
The Science of Good interviews support the work of For Goodness Sakes, a communications firm that uses behavioral change principles to help nonprofits and government agencies advance social causes. Learn more at fgsakes.com.